So, today I'm going to tell you the story of Les, one of the greatest novels ever written by Victor Hugo. It's a huge book, more than 1,000 pages, and it covers decades of history, dozens of characters, and some of the most heartbreaking and inspiring events you'll ever encounter in literature. But don't worry, I'll guide you through it step by step. And by the end, you'll have a clear understanding of what this monumental novel is really about. At its heart, Les is about justice, mercy, love, and redemption. It's about what it means to be human, to suffer, to forgive, and to find meaning in life. And it all begins with one man, Jean Valjean. Jean Valjean starts out as a poor peasant in France. One day, desperate to feed his sister's starving children, he steals a loaf of bread. For this crime, he is sentenced to 5 years in prison. But because he tries to escape multiple times, his punishment grows, and he ends up spending 19 years behind bars. By the time he's released, he is bitter, hardened, and marked as an outcast. He carries a yellow passport that identifies him as an ex-convict, which makes society shut its doors to him at every turn. Wandering through towns, rejected by everyone, Valjean becomes angry and hopeless. But one night, he is taken in by a kind bishop named Bishop Myriel. The bishop gives him food and shelter, treating him with dignity. But Valjean, still trapped in his old ways, steals the bishop's silverware and flees. Soon, he is caught by the police. They bring him back to the bishop, expecting the bishop to accuse him. But instead, the bishop does something extraordinary. He tells the police that the silver was a gift, and he even gives Valjean to silver candlesticks as well. Then, when the police leave, the bishop tells Valjean that with this silver, he must make an honest man of himself. This act of radical mercy changes Valjean's life forever. It's the turning point of the novel. From that moment on, Valjean resolves to become a better man, to dedicate his life to doing good. But of course, things are not so simple. Valjean reinvents himself. He changes his name, works hard, and eventually becomes a successful businessman and even the mayor of a small town, living under the name Monsieur Madeleine. He is respected, wealthy, and charitable. But his past is never far behind, because there is a relentless police inspector, Javert, who has dedicated his life to upholding the law. Javert believes in absolute justice, black and white morality, and he is sworn to find Valjean and bring him back to prison. While living as Monsieur Madeleine, Valjean encounters a tragic woman named Fantine. She had once been abandoned by her lover, left with a child named Cosette. Fantine struggles to survive and has to leave Cosette with an innkeeper and his wife, the Thénardiers, who pretend to take care of her but actually exploit and abuse her terribly. Fantine, meanwhile, works in Valjean's factory but is eventually fired when her situation is discovered. To provide money for Cosette, she sells her hair, her teeth, and finally her body, becoming a prostitute. She falls into illness and despair. When Valjean learns about her, he feels deep guilt, because as the mayor, he feels responsible for her suffering. He promises Fantine on her deathbed that he will take care of Cosette. And so begins one of the most emotional threads of the novel, Jean Valjean becoming a father to Cosette. But before he can fulfill that promise, Valjean is nearly exposed. Another man is mistaken for him and is about to be condemned as Jean Valjean. Valjean faces a moral crisis. If he stays silent, he can continue his life as a respected mayor. But if he reveals his identity, he'll go back to prison. In a powerful scene, he chooses to sacrifice his safety and confesses that he is the real Valjean. This sets off a cat-and-mouse chase between Valjean and Javert. Valjean rescues Cosette from the cruel Thénardiers, who have been mistreating her horribly, and together they flee, beginning a new life. Valjean loves Cosette as if she were his own daughter, and she becomes his reason for living. But Javert is never far behind, always determined to recapture him. Years pass, and Cosette grows into a beautiful young woman. She eventually falls in love with Marius Pontmercy, a young revolutionary idealist. Marius and his friends are preparing for the June Rebellion in Paris, an uprising of students and workers against the government. Here, the novel shifts into a sweeping portrait of society, politics, and human struggle. We see the barricades, the bravery, and the tragedy of the rebellion. Valjean, despite his fear of losing Cosette to Marius, shows his selflessness by protecting Marius. In one of the most dramatic moments of the novel, Valjean carries a wounded Marius through the sewers of Paris to save his life. At the same time, Javert faces his own moral crisis. Valjean spares his life instead of killing him, and Javert, who has always believed in strict law and order, cannot reconcile this act of mercy. Unable to live in a world where grace and compassion contradict the law he has worshipped, Javert ultimately takes his own life. The story then moves toward its conclusion. Marius and Cosette, Mary and Valjean, feeling his role is finished, begins to withdraw. He reveals his past to Marius, who at first misunderstands and distances Cosette from him. This breaks Valjean's heart, and his health declines. But before he dies, the truth comes out. Marius learns of Valjean's sacrifices, of all he has done, and he and Cosette return to him. In his final moments, Valjean is at peace, with Cosette by his side, and he dies quietly. Illuminated by the silver candlesticks, the bishop once gave him the symbol of his redemption. So what does Les really mean? On the surface, it's a story about crime, punishment, poverty, and politics in 19th century France. But on a deeper level, it's about the conflict between justice and mercy. Javert represents the law, strict and unbending, while Valjean represents grace, forgiveness, and love. It's about how a single act of kindness can transform a life, and how even the most broken person can find redemption. Victor Hugo uses his characters not just to tell a story, but to deliver a message that society often crushes the poor and the vulnerable. But that true humanity lies in compassion. It's a novel full of suffering, yes, but also full of hope, showing us that love and mercy have the power to heal even the deepest wounds. And that is the story of Les.